In the last section, we had a long discussion about the relationship between a container and an image. We had said that a container is a running process along with a subset of physical resources on your computer that are allocated to that process specifically. We also spoke a little bit about the relationship between an image and a running container. Remember, an image is really kind of a snapshot of the file system along with a very specific startup command as well. Now, one thing that I want to mention very quickly here, in the last section, we spoke a little bit about the separation or the isolation of these resources through a technique called namespacing. And we also said that we could limit the amount of resources used by these control group things as well. Now, this feature of namespacing and control groups is not included by default with all operating systems, even though in the last section I had kind of specifically said like, oh yeah, your operating system has a kernel too. These features of namespacing and control groups are specific to the Linux operating system. So namespacing, control groups belong to Linux, not to Windows, not to Mac OS. So that might make you kind of question or wonder, how are you running Docker right now? We are running a Docker client and we are running Docker containers on a Mac OS or a Windows operating system. How is that happening if these are Linux specific features? Well, here's what's happening behind the scenes. When you installed Docker for Windows or Docker for Mac just a moment ago in the last couple of sections, you installed a Linux virtual machine. So long as Docker up here is running, you technically have a Linux virtual machine running on your computer. Inside of this virtual machine is where all of these containers are going to be created. So inside the virtual machine, we have a Linux kernel, and that Linux kernel is going to be hosting running processes inside of containers. And it's that Linux kernel that's going to be in charge of limiting access or kind of constraining access or isolating access to different hardware resources on your computer. You can actually kind of see this Linux virtual machine in practice by opening up your terminal right now. And if you run that Docker version command again and look at your server, you'll notice that there's actually an OS entry on here. And you'll notice that it probably doesn't have your operating system listed. Mine, for example, right here says very specifically Linux as the operating system. So that is kind of specifying that I'm running a Linux virtual machine, and that's what's being used to host all these different containers that you and I are going to be working with. So just a little bit of interesting trivia. Now let's take another quick break right here. We're going to continue the next section and start digging into the Docker client a little bit more. So quick break, and I'll see you in just a minute.